a bit of background. I started trialing the canvas last year, early last year. I guess. Okay, I'll go back to the start. What I was doing is I was doing some consulting and writing a book around 12 principles of modern learning, and was really coming from an inquiry-based approach to learning, and most people didn't get it because most people were really about instruction and there wasn't really a context. At the same time, I was sort of trying to start up a business, and I guess taking some business ideas around agile development and the startup world, really looking at people like Steve Blank from Harvard, who's an entrepreneur professor, runs an entrepreneur course out at Harvard. Eric Ries, who wrote the book called Lean Startup and has run a couple of countries, and really looking around continuous innovation as you try to start up a business. And both of them say that, I guess, a startup, unlike a traditional business, it's not about executing what you know, it's about a search for a business. And that's pretty similar to, I guess, I started seeing parallels with, I guess, teacher innovation, where we've moved from, I guess, the university model where universities say this is the way and we should go forward, or even looking back 10 years when the early years model was pushed out across primary schools, or the numeracy model, rather than the experts saying this is what we should do. And now seeing things like TeachMeet and Twitter and Google+, where teachers are really leading innovation in their schools. And to me, there was a lot of parallels to what they were doing in the business world. And this guy called Alexander Osterwald's written this thing about the business model canvas, where he essentially said, well, we should be able to understand all businesses and what are the essential blocks so that we can give business people and entrepreneurs common language. And it got me thinking, well, maybe why don't we have a learning model that gives educators a common language? Because I guess that was part of my problem as I worked with schools, that the way I talked about learning and understood learning and teaching was not the same way that they understood learning and teaching, because their context was totally different. And the way that we understand learning and teaching is in what we do, you know. And I'm sure Andrew in the outdoor setting is completely different to, you know, somebody at the primary school setting. But even primary schools are all different as well. So it got to the point where I sort of thought, well, maybe we could have a learning model the same way that these guys have a business model. And I started working on that, and for the first 9 months it failed miserably. And then after a while it started working. Initially it was just to do with my 12 principles, but after a while I sort of see that it could actually work, and I've had teachers looking at arboretums, and it could be around student voice. So it became not just about my principles or not just about technology innovation, but about any sort of innovation. And essentially the idea is to give teachers a common language so they can describe their learning and teaching, but also so they can experiment on learning and teaching, and I guess try out innovations and see what makes a difference in learning and teaching practice. So once it started working, I started talking to Luke, because he was a mate and he had a class and he had other teachers. So we went out to, after I did some work with some other schools, we presented at Vita and failed miserably. That was when it wasn't working. I did some work with the Catholic schools, and that's about when it started working. And then I also started talking to Luke, and Luke started to use it as with his teachers. And this year, Luke's part of the Science in Schools program, I think it's called, and he started to use it with that. So Luke, I'm going to, as a way of introducing that, maybe if you can talk a little bit about how you're using it, and then we can go back and have a bit of a discussion and answer some people's questions. Does that sound like a good idea? So maybe could you describe, I guess, the project or the program that you're part of, and then I guess what you've been doing and where you plan to go with it.
As well as being a teacher and this year,
You're getting that feedback as well.
Thank you very much. Thanks for letting me join give you some insight on what we're doing. We are a private school network. Can you describe a rather big IT team?
Okay, let's stop the feedback. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay, good. Well, okay, let's go with hand signals. It's like scuba diving over the internet. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Okay, so we started the Science in Schools initiative started at the start of this year. We had PD training last year, and it's about starting a science program in our school, which, we've run science before, but not had. Sorry, I'm just getting a bit of feedback again. That's better. We haven't had a model that we've worked by. It's really sort of been hit and miss, people running their integrated topic units and trying to go from there. I guess what we did is we started looking at the canvas and we started thinking about, what's going to be a sustainable model in our school. There were schools running it in lots of different ways as specialists or as a coaching type role, and the funding runs out after 2 years. We thought a coaching role was going to work best. And I guess the model, I obviously talked to Richard a lot about the model, and I guess I talked to him about the things he was doing at Ideas Lab as well, and it really sat well with what I thought we could do in the school. What we tried to do was try to use it a bit as a mapping tool, as well as a tool for looking at maybe best practice for delivering our science program that we wanted to run. I'm going to be trying, I'll try this, but this is very high tech of me. I'm going to point the camera at my laptop. Can you guys just, I don't know if that's going to be big enough for you guys. Can you read any of that? I see everyone leaning in. Probably not. Go for hand signals? No? I can talk about it if you can't read it at all. Yeah, that's a mixed response.
I'm just
That's
laughing
okay.
at everyone squinting, looking in at their screen.
Yeah, sorry about it. I'll just talk about it. That's okay. So basically, if you guys have seen the model, it breaks it down into fairly simple to understand boxes. So we ran a session with our staff about what are we actually doing and how are we going about it, and really when I led this discussion, I didn't give them any answers or guide any discussion. And I think the model's really nice because when Richie came out and tried it at my school, we trialled it on another thing, but I think it gives every teacher a voice. I think the way it breaks it down, you've got your learner's role, the strategies, the pedagogical beliefs, the educator's role, and I think everybody has something to contribute. And so during the meeting, we really mapped where our staff were and what they were doing and what beliefs we had and how we were assessing. And it was a pretty confronting conversation, but I think the model sort of scaffolds the conversation quite well. Like we really were able to sort of look at our strengths and our weaknesses. I then went away and looked at the model, and so the model's got, I'm going to do this again just for the colours, which is built in like a stoplight system. So this is the map we had of our school. We've got quite a lot of orange, a couple of red. We've got one green there, which is the activities we're running. And so we then went away and looked at, you'd probably rather look at the computer screen than me, but we then went away and looked at what did we want to do. So within the model, I think this is really part, I'm going to do this again to you. This is part of the online system. It's got different models. I know that's probably ridiculous, but that's our startup one, and we've mapped our staff down here. They're on their own, and then we've looked at the top here at what we're doing at the moment. We've looked down here, so we've mapped that out just like we did the other one. We've also mapped where we want to be in 2 years. So basically, if everything was green, what would be the exact thing? There's a few boxes that are empty still. This is obviously a bit of a work in progress and things are going to change, but we've mapped everything in green and said, in 2 years' time, if we can successfully get to do what we want to do and have our science program running exactly how we would want it to run, then these are the things we'd be doing. And so it helped us to really break down and look at the models and say, what do we really need to be doing what's really helpful is comparing that model to the mapping we did with our staff early on and saying, where are the key things that we need to work on? One of our things was teacher pedagogy. We had some interesting things like teachers have to give kids all the answers, and really to run a good science inquiry program, that's definitely something we need to work on. So it's helped us map PD going forward, and it's really helped. I go and talk to my boss about these things, and we talk about the sessions that we want to run and how we need to upskill the staff, and we've got good strengths, and I think it's good to tell the staff we've got these great learning activities happening, but maybe we can change our approach a little bit. It really just mapped out the way that we want to move forward. I think that's one of the great strengths of the model. It really allows you to really pick and choose and look at what are the parts that are workable. There's a few boxes we need to leave alone for a while. I think we're only very new. We're one term into a 2-year project. We're really trying to pick the areas that we can work on and that staff will get on board, and then we can build on those boxes going forward. And so one of the projects that we've been looking at for the term was actually a question in Richard's model. I'm going to flip it around again. I'm sorry if you can't read any of this, but in Richard's model, you can actually ask questions off here. So that one there, you won't be able to read, but it says, how do we integrate science better through literacy and numeracy? And so what we've started doing is building out these boxes and actually typing down the things that are going to help us do this and how we're going to best do that. Because our vision of teaching science in our school is to integrate it better, not have it a standalone subject, integrate it through numeracy and literacy, and a lot of good schools are doing that already, and we think that's the way of keeping it sustainable. I guess, I've said it a couple of times now, but the best thing I find about the model is that it compartmentalizes everything. You can really break it down. Then once you get used to it and reading the model, obviously the boxes are interrelated. They're not standalone, and they each relate to each other in different ways. And moving forward, we're going to look at how these boxes, how will our teacher pedagogy change our students' responsibilities or our teachers' responsibilities, and how they work together. Is that detailed enough, Richard? Do you want to hear more? I could probably keep talking about it, but
No, that's. Does anybody have any questions for Luke, or is it what would be useful for me to do now? Would you like me to do the screen share? Unfortunately, I can't. I've made the site too secure, so I can't actually get in and show you Luke's things through my screen share unless he makes them private. I probably shouldn't have done that. I should have been a good administrator and being able to see everything. But I can go through the canvas if that's useful, or if people have got any questions, because I think most people have seen the canvas. What would be useful? Do you want to either grab a microphone and tell me now, or go in the chat? What would be useful now for me to? Or do you have any questions about how we see it working, or questions for Luke or myself?
I'm not getting the chat there, Richard, so if there happens to be a question my way.
No, well, there's no chat at the moment. Everyone's sitting there, so I assume that everybody's in real time and can hear us. Scott's nodding, so that's good.
Someone's nodding.
Yes, it looks like Andrew's talking, but his microphone's muted. So
Now he's a bit frozen. Oh no, he's back.
I'll unmute him. Oh, no, it's muted. I can't unmute him.
Andrew.
Mr. Google.
He can obviously hear us.
He can hear us. Yeah, I love the
This is
side. I love the profile too.
he's now in twice.
Oh, he's,
He's, he's twice the man.
he just wants twice the attention. Hmm.
Okay, well, maybe dare I try screen sharing and show you how the app works?
Yeah.
Give it a go.
Go for
Okay, and if the whole thing crashes, we'll just give up and close the thing down. How about
it.
that? Okay. Let me see where the
I'm back.
start that.
Welcome
Well,
back,
did you want to
Andrew.
say something, Andrew? Did you
Oh,
have a question?
Yeah, sorry. I was just asking. I just wanted to ask. Yeah.
Yes, Andrew? No?
I think he's
no, not
behind
yet.
a bit.
Oh, that's good.
He's typing.
He's going to come in a minute.
It's funny. I can hear him typing. Oh, is that Richard?
Ah, there you go. He's getting massive delay. This is one of the problems of having the NBN in your suburb.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, well, we'll see if Andrew, just interrupt me if you get the chance, and I'll try some screen sharing. So once you're logged in, and people, please interrupt me if this is not working, you're not seeing it. Once you're logged in, you see this, and I've actually got 5 separate models on this account that I've logged in at, and people have seen those because I've shared all of those 5 in the Google Plus community. And so, for example, I attempted to represent the early years writing. You can see that the name of the model is that. I've got the progress bar which says that on this model, this canvas has all yellow, those traffic lights, so I've got 9 oranges there, and I've got a bunch of actions, but I'll talk about those later. If I click on the title, that takes me to the canvas, and you can see that I've filled this in. I've actually color-coded it around the activities. So I've got the whole small and whole lesson it is, and I've used colors in this just to I guess help say that the small group activity is all in blue, for example. And so looking at what are the activities that we do during a early years program, what then is the learner's role? So the learner has to complete tasks, do the different things as part of that lesson. What's the educator's role, I guess? And then looking at, well, what are the strategies that learners use? What are the enablers or the technologies? So a whole class space, tables grouped in, so these can be technologies, they can be spaces, they can be, we've had one school looking about outdoor spaces, arboretums. It could be around the widest community. It could be around internet and other technologies too. We have the outcomes. So how do we measure? Well, what are we trying to get out of the learning? What are the results? What are the things that we want to see? So they could be curriculum outcomes. They could be 21st century learning outcomes. They could be whatever, social and emotional, whatever. And we also have the pedagogical beliefs down at the right-hand bottom, which talks about, well, what do we believe about learning? How do people learn? And I see that as a balance and checks. And then the last 2 boxes, in no particular order, is the culture. So what sort of culture is required in the early years classroom? What sort of policies are needed too? And to use the canvas, if you mouse over each of the names, the element names, it gives you a prompting questions. So it talks about the activities, what are the key students. And if I want to add something in there, what I do is I just click on it, and it gives me the box, and I can add something else that the students, I don't know, students hand in work. I can give it a colour, and I can put some extra information about this item that won't be shown up on the canvas, but you can see when you bring it up. So I'm not going to do that at the moment. I press Save Changes, and you can see that it adds to the canvas. I'm going to delete that now because I don't want that there. And so to make a new model, obviously we click model. Say for example I wanted to talk about flipped learning. I start the project and you can see it makes the canvas. What a student in the activities, what do students do? Well, students watch lessons at home. And then they also have discussions in class time. And when we're using this, it's really useful. And when we've done this with schools, I think it's really useful to do this in teaching teams so that you have discussions around, well, how do we run this? What happens? How do we run an early years program? What do we believe the key activities are? What do we believe the key roles and responsibilities are of the student? What are we keen about? And we, like I know Luke's used the projector and put it up on the wall and had the PLT, the team of teachers, discussing teaching and learning around their canvas. And so you fill in the canvas and you get some shared agreement. And most of the boxes are pretty small. So when you do this, you talk about saying, well, what are the 3 or 4 most important things for that? And the idea is to give some common language about the teaching and learning practice, some agreement for teachers to say, well, we do. So once we've done that, we go back to the model view, and you see it's right down the bottom. And I guess the power of this is to say, well, could we improve this canvas? You know, have we got an idea? I'm trying to think flipped learning, you know, and an idea could be about, you know, what if we added more student voice to the flipped learning classroom? What might that look like? Or what if we added 20% time? Or what if we added a technology idea? What if we started using Google Docs? So we can add that, or we can say, well, what's an experiment? So an idea would be, because what about if we started using Google Hangouts because they're so wonderful? What if we started using Google Hangouts in flipped learning? What would this mean? So we click create, and it didn't work. Why did that not work? Let's try
So,
that again.
Richard, you're actually the element here, aren't you? It's not
I am.
Google.
I don't know why it didn't work.
You're the common-
Did I do something wrong there, Luke?
No, you look fine.
Let's try that again. Okay, this time it's worked. So let me just delete that one. Watch it delete both. So now you can see that the Hangout is built upon the flipped learning. And when I click that, you can see that it's got the data that we had from the previous canvas. And so then I can start adding in some changing and saying, well, maybe we're going to use discussions in Google Hangouts. And so what might the way that we could then change the canvas, and we can also, and Luke talked about the traffic lights too, and we can then use the traffic lights by clicking on the traffic lights. And we can actually audit this canvas, and the traffic lights could mean anything. We could audit based on the use of technology. If the school's got a focus on student voice, we could audit it based on around student voice. And Luke's been auditing, I guess, his around science things. So that it's not auditing against a set thing. It's a teacher saying, well, this is where we're trying to get to. Where does each of these boxes do that? So it's just a way of saying, well, now we're happy because we really want to use Google. And we can do a bit of SWOT analysis if we want to, but we can then add it to it. And we can see that we can start to build up this idea of progress. So the way I imagine schools would use this, and teams of teachers, is that we actually want to start saying, well, this is where we're starting. What about if we made some changes? What would it look like? And so for somebody like Luke, who's doing a science thing over the course of 2 years, you'd say, well, what are the changes that we're going to see over those 2 years, and give some measure of progress? Because
Yeah,
often what schools... Sorry, Luke, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I did want to mention that. We're actually, my teachers are committed to doing this 6 monthly. So we're actually going to do this over 6 months, over the 2 years, and improve on our canvas, our teachers' canvas, and what we're doing and what we believe. And hopefully that's going to show good progress, and actually look at the areas we've worked on. Hopefully they'll become our strengths, and we'll be able to use it as a bit of a mapping tool as well. Sorry, Richard.
No, you're right. And so the way I've been using it in my workshops, for example, is I've got principles of modern learning. So I hand them out, I hand out different cards, and I get people to say, well, what would happen if we added some collaboration? The early years model, for example. So we go in there and we've copied the early years and we say, well, what would happen if one of the strategies that students use was improving each other's work? So we say, well, how would we do that? So, and I'm going to add that as green so I can tell that it's something new that we're trying. And how would we do that? Well, we might use Google Docs to keep Andrew happy, so that they can see each other's work and edit each other's work. So immediately we've started with the early years program, but what would happen if we started bringing in Google Docs, or what would happen if we started bringing in anything? How could we then change it? What would that change about? And the idea would be then, okay, let's test it out, let's see what we're doing. And if that works, great, make that the new normal practice. But if that doesn't work, and also then, well, how does that change the teacher's role then, if we're actually having the students giving feedback to each other? Well, how does that change the learner's role if they're actually giving feedback on the narratives they're writing? So that's the sort of way that I see and I noticed the time's getting quite late, so I'll just kill that demo now, and thank goodness we got through that demo. That worked quite well. Does anybody have, my faith in Google Docs has come back, Google Hangouts. So that's the way I see the Canvas, basically being able to say, give teachers a shared language, because I think it's somewhere like Luke's school, it's really important that when we get a science program coming in, or in any new initiative, we can say, well, this is where we are, this is where we understand about where we are. If these new ideas come in, what does it change in all facets of the learning, and then what we need to do, and how do we actually know that the difference it's making is a difference that we agree with? Anybody got any questions or comments or feedback around that?
Have you ever made a meta canvas?
A meta canvas?
A canvas on the canvas?
No. But I see the canvas being used like in one way you can say, we've talked about starting where you are. I don't think there's anything wrong with starting a blank canvas and let's start with the pedagogy box and say, this is what we learn. Okay, and if this is what, some of us joke about starting a new school sometimes, but I know some schools have actually, as brave as saying, well, if we just started from scratch and started with, this is how we learn, we can build it up. I guess the other thing that I wanted to say is, from the meta point of view, I think you can zoom out. I think you can say, well, what do we believe as a whole school about learning, and let's do a canvas about that. I've done the early years canvas, but that's quite a high view of early years. There's no reason why you couldn't actually zoom in and say, well, something like guided reading or shared reading, let's map that out on the canvas so that we really understand what's happening in shared reading, if that's something that you do. So in that way, I see that there can be lots of different levels that we can actually say, well, how do I run this activity, and what difference would it make, and how do we get some agreement about what we're trying to do there as a teacher, and then what would happen if we tried some innovations around that thing. And I think sometimes zooming might be really useful, but sometimes zooming right out might say, well, I think student voice is a really good thing too, to say, well, as a whole school, if we had a focus on student learning, what might change in the big picture? Scott's written something, yeah. Yeah, and I think it's really useful for looking at open spaces. I see, that's right, not just looking at technologies, and I see open spaces as being a big enabler. And when we worked with that school, that the Catholic coaches in their arboretum, that's what they said. They looked at the way that teachers are teaching, and they looked at the enabler, and they went, oh, that's why it's not working, because we expected them to do these things, but these are the sort of things that they do every day, and that doesn't really fit in line with this new space that they had. Anybody else got any questions or feedback? Or
I've got a question for Luke.
Yeah.
When you were first using the Canvas, I didn't quite get your whole presentation. I'm interested, which aspects of the Canvas did you not fill in, and why? You mentioned something. There was some aspects that you're going to leave alone. You decided not to work on those.
Oh, okay, yeah. I guess when we're filling it out with teachers, there were some just blank boxes, really. But I think my teachers really struggled to talk about the pedagogical beliefs at all. There's nothing there, and which to us wasn't that surprising. The other ones, like cultures in the school, I think we've got a lot of work to do on the culture around teaching science in our school. and how it's done. And I don't think that's going to be a great place to start with teachers. I think there's probably better links that we can make in terms of probably looking at an inquiry approach and actually looking at what pedagogical foundations does an inquiry approach really use. How does that look as a teacher, and how does that look as a learner? I think our teachers are going to get that first, and will that have an effect on the culture? Yeah, it probably will. But yeah, even policies, there's some things that we're not quite ready to tackle yet. Set policies within the schools and from leadership that possibly need to come later once we've got the teachers going and the students going. Does that answer your question? That's what you're asking.
Yeah. I was just interested, and I agree with you. I think when I first looked at it, definitely for me, the tricky ones to look at were definitely culture and policies, because I imagined filling it in. I thought, they're two interesting areas to put in. But I think the fascinating part of it is that when you do click on the green or the traffic light, is to do the SWOT analysis, and that would be fascinating to do with other sitting around a round table. Why is it that we can't feel in culture? What's their strength? If you do the analysis, then at least that's sitting there in the background somewhat to go back to.
Yeah, it is interesting. I know we looked at our pedagogical beliefs box, and basically we had one thing. It was that teachers should guide students all the time. Basically, give them the answers. And for even someone to be comfortable enough saying this is what I do at the minute was a really good discussion, because some people are nodding and some people are like, oh, maybe not. And we've got some work to do there. And when we went into the SWOT analysis, that's not so much a weakness, I don't think. I think it's an opportunity that my teachers are pretty much empty vessels, and I think they're ready to hear it, and they're ready to probably take on what we've got.
Yeah. Right.
The other idea that we're rolling out is this idea of a lens, because when I hovered over those headings, you see there were some probing questions, and the idea would be that you could then write different probing questions for different things. So say, for example, you had a one-to-one laptop lens, and there might be different questions that prompted you to say, well, I've already filled out my canvas. What are the questions I might now to think about whether I had, now that we've got one-to-one? And it might even actually offer you some elements that you would then drop into, because with one-to-one, obviously enabler would be one-to-one, and so you could have a student voice lens, or you could have a open learning spaces lens. Okay, so we're looking at open learning spaces. What are some prompts and questions that have already been developed that you might do it? And I see that being really powerful for, I guess, school leaders who maybe run a professional development session in a staff meeting or on a curriculum day. You give out all this good information, then the staff go back in the next meeting and then look at the canvas and say, okay, well, here's some prompting questions for us to say, well, what difference would those ideas make to our practice? So I guess that's the idea of that we're rolling out next. And after I've done that, and the idea would be to get experts who then would make their own lenses and I guess make them available for other people to use. And then once to do that, we want to really roll out teams and I guess whole school sites, so that you could actually see the traffic lights and the metrics and say, well, there's been this many experiments and the program's been modified this many times and the traffic lights have gone from here to here. So I guess really have some metrics around innovation, because quite often what happens at schools, not our schools, other people's schools, is that we try an innovation for 6 months or a year and then it disappears. We try thinking skills, we try this, or we try that, and slowly it dies and it disappears. And I really hope that with something like the Canvas, and I really imagine schools would use it a bit more often than 6 months, Luke, but you use it how often you want, to say, well, what are we changing? And if something dies, let's find out sooner than 6 months or a year. Let's find out what do we expect to do when we roll out a thinking skills program? What do we expect it to achieve? How does it change our practice? And then it's quickly to say, is it actually working as we thought it would work? And what do we need to change? And really say, rather than just rolling something out and hoping for goodness and hoping that it works, so we can actually have some measurable, I guess, metrics and evidence to say yes, we're on the right track, or no, this is not working out quite the way we did. So they're the main features, I guess, I'm adding to the web app over the next couple of weeks. Any other questions about about the Canvas, or how you might use it at your school or at another school? You had something, Andrew?
Yeah, I was just going to say, is that like you're thinking of building like a community around those the pop-up type things, like that you're talking about, where there'd be some form of something you could tap into, like, so if you were doing one-to-one, there would be a repository that you could go to and see those ones that people had put forward and it had worked, or even if they'd failed, really, it mightn't have worked for that person, but it might work for another person, if you know what I mean. Is that your idea?
Yeah, there is. Like, I do want to make, at the moment, you've got a choice to make it either private or public, and Luke's made his private, which is why I can't get into them. But I do want to have more granular security. So, a whole school. Do I want everybody in my school to see it? Or do I want just the teaching team? How do we see that? But then also, how can experts make lenses, or how can experts or schools that have gone well make some? Here's a model way of something we've done at our school, and it's actually worked. So we want to share that with the wider community. I see it really useful for, courses too. That people that are running courses could use it to say, for action research projects, teachers of teams of teachers, the types of projects we did with Will and Cheryl, and I guess that the department did last year. I reckon it would be really powerful to say, this is where we've started in our understanding of how we teach, and then over the process of a year, when we've actually done some focused innovation, where have we got to? What are the changes been? Yeah, so that's what I imagine. Anyone else got questions, thoughts?
Do you think there's a sort of a fine line between how it's sort of intended to be used and how some schools might sort of use it? I'm just thinking, like, got this sort of thought in my head that some schools might actually look at it and say, oh, we can do this, or we can use this as a sort of a performance tool, or as a sort of thinking along those levels, rather than just as the way it's intended.
I guess that is a concern. I think it's something that teachers could use for performance reviews. I do think we need a different model that supports, teacher-led innovation. The teachers that win the Teacher of the Year award quite often say that this is great, but everybody in my school thinks I'm a crackpot, and I'm the only one doing. That's been hopefully it's changing a little bit. And the reality is now that teachers are leading innovation. It's less likely that school innovation is going to come top down. It's less likely that we're going to be, despite what John Hattie says, it's less likely that it's going to be rolled through leadership. It's less likely that it's going to come from universities through research. It's much more likely that it's going to be led by teacher innovators, who've learnt through self-directed learning. And I think having a tool like this, I hope, is a start of a conversation to say, well, what's the role of leadership in? And I think leadership still need to set the vision. So while you're saying what's the negative consequence, and I agree, we've got to be careful about that, I think the real positive thing is saying, well, what's the new role for leadership? If they're not setting the agenda and rolling out these programs and these initiatives, what's the role for leadership to support teacher innovators in their schools? And so I see it more as a powerful way that we can bring that into the conversation and say, well, what's the role for teachers to support and encourage these teachers and help these teachers have the story to say to leadership, this is what we're doing, and bring the leadership into the innovation that's happening in the classrooms. So I've said yes, there is a danger, Mel, but I really think there's maybe it's a Trojan horse to actually empower teacher innovators.
That's not a danger. That's a positive.
Yeah.
That's a big plus. You've said a couple of things in there. One of the things you said there with the lenses, Richard, was you're going to bring in some experts, and then you contradicted yourself a little bit in saying that, hang on, this is going to be an opportunity for bottom-led innovation. So in reality, some of those experts who are going to do the lenses are actually the people who are doing the stuff. I think somewhere in the model needs to be built in the opportunity for those lenses to be accessible to be contributed to by the people who are doing it, and also especially around the area of the ones that haven't quite worked as much as the ones that have quite worked.
Yeah.
These are the
I guess,
critical
yeah,
question.
in my mind, I see the lens almost like the WordPress plugin store, that anybody can create one. That's the model that I've got for how I envisage anybody. I see anybody being able to create a lens. So I've said experts. I guess I mean somebody who's already tried it, maybe a tiny bit further down the road than you,
Yeah,
And I see that a really way of saying, because I guess the model is all around saying what's the common language? How do we develop? Because I think if we, even though we're all quite knowledgeable around education, if we try to talk about teaching and learning, there's going to be a lot of blah, blah, blah going on in this conversation, because we're all about our own experience. We have understanding on teaching and learning is what we do tomorrow in the classroom. And by having these building blocks, these 9 essential ones, say, well, we can talk about the teacher role. How does the teacher role for me differ from the teacher role in your school? How does what the learner's roles and responsibilities? And I think it does give a complete picture to give us the common language. So in one way, I hope that it draws the experts in, because some of the criticisms of experts we're seeing lately, and the backlash against them, and the keynotes that are out of touch, then it's all fuzz and it's not really grounded in teaching and learning. And I think a lot of those accusations is because we don't have the common language, and because their experience and what they're talking about doesn't fit with our experience in the classroom, and because the reality is every experience is different. And I'm sort of hope, so I agree with what you're saying about experts, but I really hope that, and I know it's a grandiose plan, grandiose objective to say, can we actually bridge that gap between experts and teachers, and can we bridge the gap between innovative teachers in the classroom and teachers that are not innovative, and innovative teachers in the classroom and the school leadership that's, I guess, less ambitious? Can we give us the common language to actually enable all these people to have this discussion about teaching and learning and about innovation?
One of the things that it does do is it enables, if you are the innovator in your school and that, it enables you to be able to describe and quantify some of the things that are problematic in terms of the support that you're receiving from leadership. So this I would see it as being a really good tool for negotiation between the innovator and the leadership. And
that's spot on.
Where you get to say, look, I'm doing these sorts of things and everything else, but there's a big mismatch here somewhere. You guys, the enablers are not all there. Get in there and give me some of this, or I can't do what I need to do, or my outcomes are really fabulous. They could be so much better, yada yada.
Yeah, that's spot on, because that's what I've found early on testing the model, is that it actually gives me a really concise conversation that I can have with my leadership team, and actually it makes it a lot easier to ask what I want.
Yeah, Andrew makes a good point in the chat about policies, and I guess when I look at the policies, quite often they're almost negative things that the blockers, sometimes we can say, well, what are the policies we're going to have to change to be positive to allow these things to happen? But, whether it's filtering, internet filtering and sites being blocked, obviously when we look at technology innovations, or even, cyber safety, if we say we're going to get to outside experts. So I see that particularly for the policies, Andrew, that they do get in the way. And it's a good way to say, what's the conversation we need to have that's based around teaching and learning, rather than based around you said this and you say that.
Which is where the SWOT analysis, if you were to talk about that, really becomes quite a powerful tool. And that's what I really like that embedded in there, because it strikes, you automatically have that conversation about it, and it's a no blame thing. It's just like, let's just look at it from standing back and having a look at it from a different viewpoint.
Yeah, and I've thought about doing other ones, to be honest, Andrew. I've thought about doing like an empathy map for the student role. What do they think, what do they hear, what do they feel like? And even for the teachers, have an empathy map, or even have, so for enablers, I've thought about using, my model around or no, for strategies. What are the social strategies in knowledge construction? What are the inquiry strategies? I've thought about having different maps behind it, but at the moment I've just, or even a two-way chart where you can actually make your own two ways. But at the moment I'm sticking with the SWOT analysis and trying to keep it simple. So that's interesting that you're giving that feedback that you think that's pretty valuable.
Yeah, I just think the key, the key word, well, one of the key words for the SWOT, I think, is the idea of opportunities. Often people don't see, if you do a plus minus, PMI, it's, I don't know, it seems to be too black and white. You know what I mean? So whereas with the SWOT, the opportunity is one in the middle there. You can extract some of these things out. Like a weakness might be an opportunity as opposed to just a weakness, or a minus. That's why I tend to like the SWOT analysis.
Yeah. And I guess, and the other thing I think's useful, I think the model, it is useful for incremental innovation. We're just trying to improve it, what we've got, building on our strengths or addressing our weaknesses. Or it does suit if we're actually looking at radical innovation and really saying, can we change these things up? It does work if we want to say, well, it's a teacher-based innovation, around assessment or improving teacher workload or saving time. It does work if it's a technology innovation, whether it be open spaces or whether it be computers and laptops and iPads and web apps. And it also does work if it's a student innovation around student voice or inquiry-based, more of a pedagogical innovation. So I do think that it works across all those different types of, I guess, innovation or improvement that schools are doing, which is quite useful. I'm conscious of the time that we've gone very late, and I know it's because we lost half an hour with our problems. Does anybody have any questions or want to bring anything to attention that we haven't discussed? Because otherwise I think we probably should wrap this up. I'm conscious of outwearing everybody's welcome. And I'm also conscious that we shouldn't, we should quit while we're ahead and not tempt fate that it's going to crash on us again.
It's going so well. I think just that there is only one danger in all of any of these sorts of things, and that is every time there's a model committed to some sort of formatting and things, it can tend to then become a fill the box type activity, and I think that's something that has to be differentiated in the whole thing, in the whole process, and made clear for people, that you're not just filling boxes.
Yeah, and I have used this model over 9 months. It didn't work, and Mel was there at Vita, and she can be a witness that it crashed and burned. It didn't work, and it went through a number of iterations. And when it started working, I was surprised as anybody that it worked so. And when it started working in areas outside technology, I was very surprised. That said, I'm still with an open mind, and I'm still waiting for somebody to say, we've really missed this. And I guess when I present it to people, they always go, yes, this looks fantastic, but I'd really like to see it for myself. And that's fair enough. And I guess the momentum is actually getting more and more people to try it out. We just had somebody pop in. And I guess the reason to... the more and more people we see, I guess the more and more people that use it. And I guess the other thing too to say is that I've actually started doing some research. So I've signed up to do a PhD so that we can actually, from a research point of view, look at the model. But yes, I'm at the point that we need to get more and more teachers using it, I guess, to prove that it works. Because I guess at the moment you're listening to me to say that it's working, and you're listening to a friend of mine, Luke, to say it's working. So I guess I'm encouraging more and more people to say, do you want to try it? And I guess that's why I've started the beta. And the paper canvas is free for anybody to use and go for their life. I want to start seeing more and more people mapping out their teaching and learning or mapping out their innovative ideas so we can actually get a collection and start saying, well, does this help us actually have a conversation around teaching and learning? But yeah, I agree. And I want you to be a healthy skeptic, John. Any others before we wrap this up? Scott, Andrew, I just muted you. I'm sorry, because I think there's a little bit of feedback coming from you. I'm not sure, but
no, Zidden's gone.
Yes. I decided not to boot him. Maybe I should have.
But yeah, I agree, and I want you to be
Yeah, Richard, I found it really interesting. Certainly made it a lot clearer what it's all about. I work in a different sector in the TAFE sector, so I have virtual experience. So just looking at how it applies to me. Someone's got some music going, it's not mine. Um, so yeah, just looking at how it could apply, and yeah, it really stretched my brain a little bit, thinking of how I could use it in different ways. Certainly have a bit of a play with it and keep in touch on the community. But thanks for all you guys who put a bit through. I just sat here and listened with a lot of interest, so it's been great.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew. Excellent. Scott, did you just conscious you haven't? We'll give you a chance. Is there anything you wanted to ask or say? I've muted you, Scott, I think, so can I unmute you? No, you got to unmute yourself. Yep.
That's better. No, I dropped out halfway through, so I didn't want to go over stuff people had already mentioned. But yeah, no, I can see how part of it would be really practical, and I'd be keen to have a go at putting one together and just seeing how it fits in with a couple of projects we're working on at school. So yeah, keen to see the practical side of it.
Excellent. Okay. Mel, Andrew, John, Luke. Luke, is there anything we haven't covered that you thought we should bring up before we say goodnight?
No. I just say, listen, if anybody is giving it a go and wants to talk about anything, feel free to make contact.
Excellent. Well, thank you everybody for joining me. Thank you, Luke, for your help tonight. Thank you everyone for your immense patience getting through those technical issues. I'm not sure if I'm scared of Google Plus for another time or not. The beta is available. I pretty much put new people on every week. I think a few of us in this room are in the beta, a few aren't. So anybody wants to jump into the beta, anybody sees the recording too, go to the site or shoot me an email or drop me a message through Google Plus, and we'd love to have you involved. And if you need any more information, really, I'd love to help you out. So thank you very much. I'm going to press stop, and I don't know what I'm going to do with this recording. I don't know if I can edit it, but we'll see how we go.